Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MTG Traders. My name is Taryn, and this is Budget Mono Black Discard. So if you guys saw the video yesterday, today's video is going to be a super budget list, and this is centered around Mono Black Discard, a deck I did a live stream on a couple weeks ago that went over really well, but I never actually did a full deck on it, and I think the actual list is good enough to be a budget deck without really having to include anything that's of value. Again, the deck text, I want to try and keep them under 10 tickets and under $30 in paper if I possibly can, and this one is coming up to around 6 tickets. But of course, before we get into the video, make sure to like the video if you like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell right outside the subscription button to know when we upload a video on the channel and when we go live on the stream right here on YouTube. But without further ado, let's get right into it. We have 4 Kite Sail Freebooter, a 2-mana 1/2 human pirate with flying, and whenever Kite Sail Freebooter enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it, exile that card until Kite Sail Freebooter leaves the battlefield. So Kite Sail Freebooter is a great way to follow up a duress on turn 1 or something like that on turn 2 for Kite Sail Freebooter to come in and kind of take either another removal spell or a control magic spell, anything basically from their hand that's a non-land, non-creature card from it, put it underneath Kite Sail Freebooter and make sure they can't use it until they either get into some more removal to remove Kite Sail Freebooter or it just dies in combat. Either way, Kite Sail Freebooter is a fantastic way for us to shut down their strategy early game and to make sure that they have one less card than they started with in the opening hand. Moving up, we have 4 Deadeye Tormentor, a 3-mana 2/2 human pirate with raid, and of course it enters the battlefield. If you attack with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. So a 3-mana 2/2 is not that great, but with the raid trigger here for Deadeye Tormentor, it's actually fantastic. It's a great way for us to get a discard trigger as well as get a 2/2 body on the same turn, and I think that's quite good because it can discard any card, so it doesn't have to be non-land card or non-creature card, things like that. It can be just anything, so I think that's going to be great. One of the things I do want to keep in mind though is that this is going to be one of those cards that they might actually get some advantage from this if we're up against a Godfarrow's Gift strategy, so just keep that in mind. Next up on the last 4 creatures of the deck, we have Dreamstealer, a 3-mana 1/2 with menace, and of course whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards that many cards. And of course it has Eternalize for 6 mana, which comes back as a 4/4 zombie, human wizard with no mana cost. And of course, whatever damage it does to our opponent, they discard that many cards. So if it does 4 damage to our opponent, they discard 4 cards, which is backbreaking and just insane. That is all the creatures in the main board. So basically, our creatures are going to grab cards out of their hand as early as possible with Kite Sail Freebooter, discard cards with a flying attack after the Kite Sail Freebooter attacks in with a Deadeye Tormentor, and then we kind of play out a Dreamstealer and just kind of get in turn over turn thanks to its menace ability and discard some cards that way. But let's move on to spells here. We have 19 total. We have 4 Duress, a 1-mana sorcery. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. So a fantastic turn 1 play against a control strategy, a heavy removal strategy, a Godfarrow's Gift strategy. Anything like that, Duress is going to deal with it ridiculously well, and of course it's our turn 1 play, so it's just super good, and it really helps us kind of set up our following plays as we know what they have in their hand. Next up, we have 2 Harsh Scrutiny, a 1-mana sorcery. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a creature card from it. That player discards that card, and we scry 1. So Duress is going to be great at getting rid of removal and counters. Harsh Scrutiny is going to be good at getting rid of like a Scarab God or any kind of creature that's in their hand that we really don't like. Again, this is a great turn 1 play as well, but I would rather prefer probably Duress against most matchups, but against a game 2 matchup, Harsh Scrutiny might be the first turn play we want to do instead. Next up, we have 2 Torment of Hellfire. So this is basically a win con for us here. An X2 black mana and a sorcery. Repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. So Torment of Hellfire is a fantastic way to end a match for us, but we want to keep in mind that if they do have a token-based strategy or a lot of artifacts on the battlefield, Torment of Hellfire might not be as effective as we want it to be. So we do want to keep that in mind, but overall, Torment of Hellfire, if we can get out for like 9 or 10 and 2 black, I think that's going to be basically the end of the game for us. It should be a great way to end a match. Next up for us, we have 1 Bantu's Last Reckoning, a 3-mana sorcery. Destroy all creatures. Lands you control don't untap during your next untap step. So this is because there are a lot of token-based strategies. We have the mono white vampire monument deck, we have the just mono white monument deck, we have also the stockpile deck, and a lot of other token based strategies in the meta right now. Bantu's Last Reckoning is going to deal with that, make sure that our board is clean of creatures, and then we can either Torment of Hellfire the following turn if we have the mana to do so, or just kind of like line up our plays for the following turn. This is also a fantastic way to get a Dreamstealer from the battlefield into the graveyard if they don't feel like killing it, because a lot of opponents like to keep the Dreamstealer on a battlefield because they do not want a 4/4 coming out that has menace. So using a Bantu's Last Reckoning to our advantage might be very good for us. Next up, we have 4 Heartless Pillage, a 3-mana sorcery. Target opponent discards 2 cards, and of course it has Raid. If you attack with a creature this turn, create a colorless treasure token, and of course we can sack that to add 1 mana of any mana to our mana pool, or of any color rather. But Heartless Pillage is basically, you know, discard 2 cards, but of course if we have any creatures on the battlefield attacking in, we get a treasure token out of that, which is fantastic for us overall. But just having our opponent discard 2 cards is backbreaking in the mid to late game. By turn 5 or 6, they should have probably 4 or 3 cards in their hand. Heartless Pillage is going to make sure they have almost no cards in their hand, or maybe just the 1 card that they really need that we can then grab with a Duress, Harsh Scrutiny, or maybe even a Kite Sail Freebooter that turn or the following turn. Moving on though, we have 3 Painful Lesson, a 3-mana sorcery. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 lives. So Painful Lesson is actually going to be a card we're going to maybe use against our opponent to kill them off. But it's also a great way for us to draw cards ourselves, so a 3-mana draw 2 is actually not too terrible, and it's going to be a great way to kind of either kill our opponent with the last 2 ping of life, or make sure that we actually have some card draw, force some card advantage against our opponent. So overall, just a very simple card, but very effective. Next up, we have 2 Swordpoint Diplomacy, again, a similar card to Painful Truths. 3-mana sorcery, reveal the top 3 cards of your library. For each of those cards, you may put that card into your hand unless your opponent pays 3 life, then exile the rest. So this is going to be a fantastic way to either ping our opponent for damage because they might not want any cards into our hand, so that's 9 damage right there. But more often than not, it's just a 3-mana draw 3 cards into our hand in the mid to late game when our opponent has really down on cards in their hand and really down on life. Again, just like Painful Truths, Swordpoint Diplomacy is quite simple, but is a great way to kind of draining our opponent's life total down to 0. Next up, we have 1 Yahini's Expertise. So there are a lot of things right now that we want to be dealing with, like the token-based strategy, as well as like a Yahini if it's indestructible, things like that. Yahini's Expertise is going to be a great way for us to do that. It's a 4-mana sorcery. All creatures get -3/-3 until end of turn, and you may cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So Heartless Pillage, Swordpoint Diplomacy, Painful Truths, things like that, we can really cast those out without paying their mana cost thanks to Yahini's Expertise. That does it for spells. Let's get to enchantments here. We have 2 Raider's Wake, a 4-mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. So another way to drain our opponent's life total down to 0. And of course it has Raid. At the beginning of your end step, if you attacked with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. So we have 12 creatures that have, 2 of them have evasion, or 2 types of them have evasion rather. And Raider's Wake is going to be a raid trigger for us to get them to lose 2 life as well. So in the mid to late game, they may not have any cards in their hand, so make sure to use Raider's Wake sparingly. But it is a 4-mana enchantment, so it's not going to have great like onboard presence unless we have a good onboard presence ourselves. So it's one of those cards that it might not be very good in game 1. We might want to sideboard it out and bring in something else for game 2. And of course, the last 3 enchantments of the deck, we have 3 Torment of Scarabs, a 4-mana enchantment or a curse. Enchant player. At the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, that player loses 3 life unless he or she sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. So Torment of Scarabs is another great way that if they don't have cards in their hand, they're going to be pinged for 3 life, and if they don't want to lose their board state, they're still going to be pinged for 3 life as well. So Torment of Scarabs is another great way to either close out a match. Keep in mind that Torment of Scarabs is also kind of slow too, so we kind of want to keep that in mind for Raider's Wake and Torment of Scarabs. They might be coming out in game 2, just in case we're up against either a super aggressive strategy or maybe a more control heavy strategy, because a 4-mana enchantment aura like this is going to be one of those cards that might just be countered. But that is all the cards in the deck besides lands. Let's go to lands real quick. We have 4 Evolving Wilds, which is a great way to get another land out of our battlefield. We're not going to be mana fixing. All we're doing is basically triggering Evolving Wilds to get an extra mana into the battlefield and thin our deck a little bit. And then we have 20 Swamp, and that is it. I thought about putting in some Scavenger Grounds, but that kind of would break our little like rule as far as this being like cheap. I think Scavenger Grounds is like, for 2 of them, it's about 3 tickets. If you guys want to add these Scavenger Grounds in, that's about 3 tickets. And I would definitely recommend that because God First Gift is still out there. And this is kind of one of the decks that I like enables that deck. So we do want to keep in mind of that. But I did not have the like ticket. I want to keep this super budget, so I did not add them into the deck themselves. But that is the one card that I think needs to be in this deck probably to be quite good. So okay, our game 1 game plan is to get cards out of our opponent's hand, attack in with our creatures, and then Torment of Hellfire, or Painful Truths, or Swordpoint Diplomacy, or Torment of Scarabs our opponent to death. What can we do in game 2 against control, aggro, or any kind of removal strategy? What can we do? Let's go to our sideboard here. We have 2 Lay Bare the Heart, a 2-mana sorcery. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-legendary non-land card from it. That player discards that card. So if we know we're up against a deck that doesn't have any legendary creatures or anything like that, we're bringing in Lay Bare the Heart. Most likely using duress slots here for Lay Bare the Heart, maybe some Painful Truths, depending on what kind of matchup we're against. But Lay Bare the Heart is a fantastic card card for us that can actually get rid of anything but basically a god that we really don't like in the battlefield. Do be aware too of the pirate strategies, because there are a lot of legendary pirates, so Laid Bare the Heart would be useless against that too. Next up, we have 1 Dispossessed, a 3-mana sorcery. Choose an artifact card name, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with a chosen name and exile them. Then that player shuffles his or her library. So Dispossessed is going to be grabbing a Trench of Gearhulk or a God-Pharaoh's Gift, which is incredibly important for us. It's just a fantastic way to board in here and just completely dominate against a God-Pharaoh's Gift strategy if they do not have God-Pharaoh's Gift in the deck. It's just sad. Hashtag savage. Next up, we have 3 Doomfall, a 3-mana sorcery. Choose one. Target opponent exiles a creature he or she controls, or target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it and exile that card. So Doomfall is a great way to get around a hexproof creature like a Carnage Tyrant, a great way to get around a Scarab God if it's the only thing on the battlefield, and also a great way to just either grab something out of their hand that we really don't like an Approach to the Second Sun, things like that. Doomfall might be coming in over a Raider's Wake, Sword Point Diplomacy, something like that. Overall, though, I really like Doomfall, and I think it's great against an aggro strategy as well as a control strategy because it just does so much. Next up, we have 2 Lost Legacy, a 3-mana sorcery. Name it a non-artifact, non-land card. Search target player's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of the cards with the same name and exile them. That player shuffles his or her library, then draws a card for each card exiled from this hand, or from their hand this way. Lost Legacy for us is a fantastic way to get rid of a Scarab God, a Hazoret, any kind of god we really don't like. As well as getting rid of any kind of strategies like Approach to the Second Sun. This is definitely going to be coming in against a Approach deck, or maybe a blue-white cycling deck, like with Drakehaven. Lost Legacy is going to be able to grab that and exile them and completely shut down their deck. So Lost Legacy and Dispossessed are basically the 2 cards that a lot of people are like, it's not that great, but if it goes off and hits the card we really need it to hit, then it completely dominates our opponent, and we just win outright. There are so many times when I cast Lost Legacy that I'm up against an Approach to the Second Sun deck, and I get rid of Approach to the Second Sun, and they just fold. So Lost Legacy, while it's not that great, it can be ridiculously powerful against the right matchup. Moving on, we have 2 Gonti Lord of Luxury, a 4-mana 2/3 Aetherborn Rogue with Death Touch, and of course when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your opponent's library, exile one of them face down, then put the rest on the bottom of their library in any random order. For as long as that card remains exiled, you may look at it, you may cast it, and you may spend any mana as though it were mana of any type to cast it. So Gonti is going to be coming in if we're up against a control strategy, or if we're up against any kind of strategy that's going to be locking down our board state. It's just a fantastic way for us to make sure that our opponent is not going to be able to use the card that they're drawing into. It's also a fantastic way to play against an Approach to the Second Sun deck if we know that Approach to the Second Sun is going to be in their actual deck as well. So if they say, okay, well, I'm going to cast Approach for the first time, and then they start drawing into cards or getting cards at the top, we can play a Gonti follow-up and then grab their Approach out of their deck and actually cast it for ourselves, which is kind of hilarious. And of course, it's very brutal against our opponent. Moving on from Gonti, though, we have 2 Hour of Glory. This would be a slot for Vraska's Contempt, but I think Hour of Glory is here just because we really can't afford Vraska's Contempt in the actual budget deck. But Hour of Glory is good for us as well. It's a 4-mana instant, exile target creature. If that creature was a god, its controller reveals his or her hand and exiles all cards from it with the same name as that creature. So again, this is going to be taking care of a Hazoret, a Scarab God, a Ronos, anything like that, Locust God, the random Locust God that are out there sometimes. Hour of Glory is fantastic for us as far as a good exile strategy for us for creatures, but Vraska's Contempt is really good because it does exile a Planeswalker as well. So we are losing that, but if we're really diligent with our discarding and hand hate, we shouldn't be seeing any Planeswalkers anytime soon. Next up, we have 2 Torment of Venom, a 4-mana instant. Put 3 -1/-1 counters on target creature. Its controller loses 3 life unless he or she sacrifices another non-land permanent or discards a card. So a great way to power down a creature or kill it outright, as well as do a secondary ability as like discarding a card or making them lose 3 life if they don't want to sacrifice a non-land permanent. So Torment of Venom is, while it's not too mana efficient for us, it can be a great way to kind of shrink their board state to a more reasonable measure. And the last card in the sideboard is a crazy one for us. We have 1 Cruel Reality, a 7-mana enchantment or a curse enchant player. At the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. If that player can't, he or she loses 5 lives. So this is basically a great way to put the lockdown on an Approach to the Second Sun deck, perhaps, or any kind of other control strategy that they really don't have a lot of cards in their hand at the moment, and they don't really have a board presence because they're a control deck. So Cruel Reality is just going to be dealing 5 damage to the face every single turn until our opponent is dead. And that is the full 75, guys. On MTGO Traders, this is coming to about 6 tickets, and in paper, I think it's coming to about $25, $26. This is a super fun, super competitive, and super cheap deck. I really hope you guys liked it. I loved building it, and of course, on the stream, this is going to be super devastating against our opponent. But of course, let me know what you think, guys. Would love to hear your responses. Leave a comment down below and like the video if you liked it. And of course, if you're not subscribed to the channel already, make sure to hit that subscription button. But of course, that's it for me today, guys. I love you, and I'll see you in the next video.